What we saw in this Maamar in the middle of Daled is that a comparison of the two different divine lights that extend to the world, the Ur HaMamalek Kol Almin and the Ur HaSovek Kol Almin, the light that fills all worlds and the light that surrounds all worlds. The light that fills all worlds means the divine light that is catered to the world, that enters the world in a limited fashion and enlivens the world from within. Like the soul fills the body, enters the body and fills the body and shapes itself to the body, so too the divine light fills the world. So the soul energy in the eye is the power of sight. The soul energy in the feet is the power of walking. Different soul energies. The soul actually is contained in the body and affected and shaped by the body. So too the divine light fills all the worlds and every level and every existence in the world according to its capability. But that's only one level of divine light. Then there's the Ur HaSovek, of the light that's beyond all worlds, and that is in all worlds equally, because it's not limited, it's not defined, it's not shaped to the world, it's beyond the world, beyond the limitation of the world, the infinite light of Hashem. Similar to the soul, also has parts, the real part of the soul, the real source of the soul is beyond the body, not limited to the body. Now, we said that the Jewish people are expected to have a level of faith that says that Hashem is all there is and there is nothing else. Radical monotheism. As opposed to the rest of the world have to believe that Hashem is Hashem, but they don't have to have that level of faith that there's nothing but Hashem. In fact, they could even believe that Hashem exists, but he has partners that he works together with. The reason why is because the Jewish soul is sourced in the Ur HaSovek, in the light that is beyond all worlds. On that level, the world has no existence. There is only Hashem. Whereas the non-Jewish soul is sourced in the Ur HaMamalek, in the light that fits into the world, and therefore the world has existence. There's not just Hashem, there's the world as well. And in fact, the Ur HaMamalek functions with other levels of spiritual powers. That's what we got up to, and we're in the middle of that discussion. So we're going to continue with that concept. Ukyodua. So about halfway down the page, the last word on the line is ukyodua with 38. It says the number 38 next to it, right at the end of the line. Yeah, on the left column there. Ukyodua the nishmus Yisrael sharshem and pnimis haratzon. V'masa'olam sharshem echitzonis haratzon. As is known, what's written in Chassidus, that the Jewish soul is sourced in pnimius haratzon, the deeper aspect of the divine will. Whereas the nations of the world, their soul is sourced in the outer aspect of the divine will, chitzonius haratzon. What does that mean? What does it mean that the Jewish soul is in the inner level of the divine will, whereas the non-Jewish soul is from the outer level of the divine will? With a human being, with ourselves, using ourselves as a metaphor, a person has will, things you want, and there are things that you want with your pnimius haratzon, with the depth of your will. That means something that you want it for itself. As opposed to something that you don't want it is secondary to something else. Such a thing you have not inner will but outer will towards. Meaning, what's the difference between inner will and outer will? You want to eat, let's say. You want to eat. So that is your pnimius haratzon. Your inner will is that I want to eat at the moment. So in order to eat, so you have to get food. You have to go and cook. Or prepare or buy. You have to go and get the food. So do you want to go and cook? That's not what you said. I didn't say I want to cook, I want to eat. But in order to eat, you have to cook. So do you want to cook? Well, yeah, you want to cook, but not cook because you want to cook. You want to cook because you want to eat. So your pnimius haratzon is to eat. Your chitzonius haratzon is to cook. Sometimes you want to cook. That's what you want to do. That's your pnimius haratzon. So then you have to get the ingredients together. Is that what you want to do? Go and get the ingredients? No, you want to cook, so you have to get the ingredients. There's always a pnimius and a chitzonius to every will you have. There's what you want, and there's the things that you need to get to what you want, so therefore you want them as well. But you want them in a secondary way. The Pnimis Ratzon is what you really want. The Chitzonis Ratzon is things that, not that you wanted them for themselves, but they're necessary to get to what you really want. That's the difference between Pnimis Ratzon and Chitzonis Ratzon. What I really want, and what I want because I want that.
So it's called inner will and outer will?
Yeah. Meaning the Pnimis here means the real depth of what you want, and then there's superfluous or superficial levels of will that you want them, not because you want them, because you want something else. So if I have a friend, but the reason for my friendship is because I think this person is a good connection and will get me places, so my friendship with that person is a chitzonius aratzon. It's not I really want your friendship, I really want what you can give me, the connection you can give me. So I'll be friends with you. Whereas if I'm friends with somebody because they're a person that I admire and want to be with, so then that's a pnimius, that's an inner connection. Whenever something is a means to something else, so then your connection with this is a chitzonius, is a superficial connection. I'm not really connected to you, I'm connected to something else, and you're going to get me there. Whereas if it's you that I'm connected to, that's a pnimius connection. So kumeken yuvin l'mayla. In a similar way above, just like we have ratzon on those two levels, chitzonis and pnimis, so too with Hashem. The nishmis Yisrael Shem atachlis, that the Jewish soul, which is the point of creation, well, the reason why Hashem created the world is to have a relationship with the Jewish soul. Shorshim and pnimis aratzon. So that means that our soul is coming from pnimis aratzon, the inner will of Hashem. But the nations of the world come from chitzonis aratzon, because that's not the point of creation. Meaning, just to get it clear what this means, what does it mean that the Jewish soul is what Hashem really wanted, whereas the non-Jewish soul is not what Hashem wanted? Originally, at the beginning of creation, there were not Jews and non-Jews. There were not different nations. There was Adam and Eve, and had things gone smoothly, there would be Adam and Eve and their children, and they would be what we now call the Jewish people, the chosen people. Everyone would be Hashem's people, serving Hashem. Because Adam and Eve sinned, and the generations after them sinned, so they were banished from the Garden of Eden. They lost their status. And it was only when Avram Avinu, Abraham, came along, and he chose Hashem. So Hashem said, okay, so you will be the father of the people, the chosen people. That the special connection, the divine mission of fulfilling the meaning of creation will be reserved for you. So originally there were not going to be Jews and non-Jews. That wasn't the idea. There would be people, Adam and Eve and their children. The concept of a non-Jew, of a non-chosen person, was introduced to creation through the sin of Adam and Eve. And so therefore, what did Hashem want? What's his pnimis aratzon? For there to be Jewish people, meaning people serving him, connecting to him, bringing the divine light into the world. That was what Hashem wanted. Did Hashem want there to be other nations? That wasn't the original plan. That wasn't the purpose. But because the world became corrupt, so there needed to be a division. So therefore, that's chitzonis aratzon. That's not what Hashem actually wants. What Hashem actually wants is the relationship that he has with the Jewish people.
So that was done at Adam and Eve, not when Abraham kind of discovered.
Well, Adam and Eve lost the status of being the chosen, and it wasn't until Avram Avinu came that the chosen came back.
Right.
So what the Rebbe here has pointed is, when we're talking about a human being's ratzon, I want to be friends with you because you're going to get me somewhere, but I don't really want to be friends with you, or it's not my original plan, but because I need to, it's necessary, so I become friends with you, as opposed to someone who I'm really friends with. I didn't create you, I didn't make you, I just created the friendship. With the soul, Hashem created the soul. So where did the soul come from? On what level in the divine did the soul appear? Where did our soul begin? For the Jewish soul, it started in Pnimius HaRatzon, in the deepest aspect of Hashem. His very purpose of creation is fulfilled with the Jewish soul. Whereas the soul of Umas HaOlam, of the nations of the world, that came later. That was an afterthought. That wasn't the original thought. So that's Chitzonius HaRatzon. That's not in the original plan. That's a step lower. So therefore the soul came from that level. That's where it actually comes from. Yeah? So that's true of the souls of the nations of the world. Or befrata klippa v'sitra achra. But if you're talking about the powers of evil, klippa and sitra achra, the other side, the unholy side of spirituality, shekol hakavana behem hu sha'adam yizgaber aleim la'kafi lahoin. So they certainly are from Chitzonius HaRatzon, because the whole point of evil, of the other side, of sitra achra, of klippa, is that we should overcome it. The whole reason why there is evil in the world, why is there evil? To be overcome, to be vanquished, to be beaten. So certainly, evil is created by Chitzonius HaRatzon. Because that's not what Hashem wants. Hashem doesn't want there to be evil. Hashem wants us to overcome evil. So it's simply a means to an end. The end is to become holy. How do you become holy? By overcoming the klippa, the powers of evil. So does Hashem want there to be evil in the world? Well, He does, because He wants us to overcome it. So what type of ratzon is there in evil? Chitzonius HaRatzon. Not Pnimius HaRatzon. It's not that I want evil. I want you to overcome evil, so you need evil. I mean, the Rebbe Rashabi in one place says it in even deeper terms. He says the evil only exists because Hashem doesn't want it. It gets its existence from Hashem not wanting it. Because if Hashem doesn't want something, well, that already gives it existence. Because Hashem is so infinite, is such an essence that if He doesn't want something, that gives it an existence. What type of existence? A non-entity existence, an unreal existence. So therefore, evil exists as an unwanted reality. That's certainly Chitzonius HaRatzon. This is what I don't want. So, and this is a very profound approach that Chassidus presents to the existence of evil. How can evil exist? How can a power that's against God exist? In Chitzonius HaRatzon it can exist. It's not that Hashem wants it. Hashem wants it for a purpose. So therefore, He gives it an existence, a flimsy existence, real enough to fool us that evil is a real temptation, but it doesn't have a true base. It's not a real thing because Hashem doesn't want it. It only exists because Hashem doesn't want it. It's the thing not to do. When we do it, we give it more existence than it really deserves. When you do evil, so then you've given it a reality. It's supposed to be just the option you don't take. That's all evil is supposed to be. The thing you don't do. The thing you could do but don't do. It's not real. When you do it, you've made it more real than it deserves to be.
So His real will is to be holy.
Yes. And one of the ways to do that is to overcome evil. Like we said earlier in the Maamar, when you overcome the temptation to do evil, the holiness you bring down is so intense because you've transcended yourself, you've gone above yourself and your temptation, so then you draw down a light that's a transcendent light.
But if we, like the Jewish soul is the...
Pnimius HaRatzon.
Yeah, so isn't that not overcoming yourself? If you overcome evil?
Well, it's overcoming a level of yourself. You're overcoming your external self to bring out your inner self. So v'liyos, the word on the end of the line, v'liyos. V'liyos sheshor shom mechitzonius haratzon bilvad. So because the nations of the world, their soul is sourced in the outer level of Ratzon, V'chitzonis harotzen ba be'er hamamala, and chitzonis harotzen, the outer level of rotzen, is synonymous with the hamamala, the divine light that fills all worlds. It's not the inner deep light of Hashem, which is the Sova beyond all worlds. It's the more external, diluted light of Hashem, the hamamala. And we said earlier that on the level of the hamamala, the light that fills all worlds, there is room for another existence. There's Hashem and the world. So therefore a non-Jew is not forbidden to believe in shituf, in divine partnership, that Hashem works with partners. Did you get that? Again, that a person can only be expected to reach as high as their source, as their spiritual source.
That's their reality.
Yeah. You can't be expected to go beyond where you come from. The divine level from which the non-Jewish soul derives is the hamamalakal almin, the light that fills all worlds. Meaning, the level of Hashem as He has already constricted Himself to relate to the world. How do we know that? Because that's chitzonis harotzen. That's the more outer level of Hashem as opposed to the inner level of Hashem. That's where the non-Jewish soul comes from. On that level, can you say that there's only Hashem and nothing else exists? You actually can't. Because the hamamala, the light that fills all worlds. It has a relationship with the world. The world takes up space. And the proof is that there's less divine light in a lower world than there is in a higher world. Meaning the world impacts the divine light. It affects the divine light. Even from Hashem's perspective, as He is within the hamamalakal almin, the world takes up space. Like we said about the soul, when the soul enters the body, it's affected by the body. The eyes will see. The soul's power to see will not be able to be in the foot. It'll only be able to be in the eye. The physical eye will affect the soul's, will draw down that soul energy. The body affects the soul on that level. So too, the world affects Hashem's light on the level of hamamalakal almin. It exists. It has a reality. So, therefore, to say that there's Hashem and only Hashem and nothing else exists, you can't say that on the level of hamamalakal almin. So therefore, a non-Jew whose soul is sourced in that level, the hamamalakal almin, they're expected to believe in Hashem as being the sole power behind creation. However, that they believe that they should be able to believe that there are other powers that He employs, yes. That He works with other powers, yes, they can believe that. Because on the level of hamamalakal almin, that's true. The world does have an existence, and there are other powers, and it's not just Hashem existing. Hashem is the above it all, but there are other powers as well. The non-Jewish soul is allowed to believe that, because how can we expect anything more from a soul that is sourced in that level?
So why do we, from my understanding, why are we unhappy with them, worshipping the sun or?
That's idolatry. That's a different thing. Worshipping some other gods is a different thing. To say that Hashem has partners that He works through, but He's above the whole thing.
Right, so not overstepping.
Yes, there's idolatry and there's what's called shituf, partnership. That's different.
What would be what is that? What's that?
Maybe Trinity,
What's that?
Christianity, that believes that, of course there's one God, but He manifests in this way and in that way, and He works with it. That could be. Or even it could be that certain... no, they can't explain it, but they believe that there's one God. If you ask them, are they monotheists? Of course.
They say thank God also many times.
Yeah.
Thank God.
For us, it's idolatry, but for them, it's called shituf. It could even be, let's say, some Eastern religions. If you go into the depth of them, many of them do believe that there is one power above everything, but He works through various different powers. Okay? So as long as you recognize the one power above, the fact that He works through other powers, that's called shituf. For a Jew, that's idolatry. But for a non-Jew, that's acceptable. Or believing in the power of the stars that have influence. Of course, God is in charge of the system, but the stars have influence. That could be shituf. partnership.
So because our source is from a higher place, is it just that we're sourced there and it's the direct line to that, or do we encompass everything below it as well?
No, we override everything below it. We go straight to the source.
We don't.
So that's why if you look at something like Christianity, so that was a religion that branched off from Judaism, which is monotheism, but somehow became this mixture of beliefs in other powers as well. How? Because if you give a non-Jewish soul Judaism, they can't grasp the radical monotheism of Judaism. They can't grasp that bit. That's not where they're from. So their translation of Judaism will end up shittuf, a partnership of other powers. That's just naturally going to happen. And so they're allowed to. They can have that. So therefore, the non-Jew is not forbidden to believe in shittuf, even though ultimately that's not the deepest truth of reality. Really, there's only Hashem, but they're not expected to get to that level. Barak, on the sixth last line of the page, Barak shal yidei hasaga is bonus hem yodim umuzharim alzeh, and only through a contemplation is a non-Jew able to come to the realization, and indeed they're expected to, sheyesh metzias shelamayla mehem, that there is an existence that is above them, mechayusam, and a higher than their life force. There's a life force that's the source of everything. The korale lekad lekaya, and they call Hashem the God of all powers, the God of all gods. Meaning, it's not natural for the non-Jewish soul to realize there's a divine power above everything, but they're expected to contemplate on that and come to that conclusion. Just like when you look at the world, you don't readily see God. When you contemplate the world, you see that, okay, there must be a source above. So the non-Jewish soul, the non-Jewish soul is a part of this world, is sourced in this world, in the Urim Malkul Almin, is expected to contemplate the fact that there is a divine power above everything, and who is in charge, who is the source of everything. Whereas the Jewish soul, because our source is in the Ur HaSov of the light that is beyond this world, so therefore it's the natural default position of a Jew to relate to Hashem. It's not something that requires contemplation or convincing. That's the Jewish soul. The Jewish soul is a believing soul. And what level of Hashem? The level of Hashem that there's only Hashem and nothing else. Nothing else exists. And so therefore we're expected to live on the level of connecting to Hashem as being not just one God, but the one, all there is. The oneness of Hashem. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. The Jewish people have to say Hashem Echad. Now this whole discussion that we went in over the last couple of pages about shutuf, partnership, and the various levels, was all to answer a question that we had earlier in the Maamar. Earlier in the Maamar we quoted what the Alter Rebbe says, that when a Jew sins, we are worse than the powers of evil, the Sitra Achra. When you listen to your Yetzer Hara, you're worse than your Yetzer Hara. And why? Because Alter Rebbe explained, because the powers of evil recognize that Hashem is God over them, just they believe that there are other powers. In other words, the powers of evil, they at least recognize Hashem. Whereas when you sin, you're not recognizing Hashem. You're going against Hashem's power, Hashem's authority. The powers of evil, the Yetzer Hara, the Satan, recognize that Hashem is the boss. They just take a bit of autonomy of themselves as well. Whereas a Jew who sins is denying Hashem as being the boss. So he said, hang on a minute, how is that worse? Why aren't they, by the powers of evil, by being independent from Hashem, isn't that idolatry as well? Isn't that a form of idolatry? So we've just explained that it isn't. How so? Have a look inside. V'lachein, the end of the fifth last line. V'lachein ha'adam ha'over aveira hu guru yosem ha'klipa v'sitra achra. A person who sins is in a worse state than the power of evil itself, than the Yetzer Hara, than klip and sitra achra. Because even though the fact that the powers of evil, when they say that God is the God of all gods, meaning God is on top, but we also have a power, we also have a say, that's what evil presents itself. That is indeed idolatry, to say such a thing. To say that Hashem is not the only power, I'm also a power, that is idolatry. It's against Hashem's will. But they are not going against the level of will to which they associate, that they have a relationship with. Meaning, does Hashem want there to be evil? No. So when evil says, I exist and I'm real, there's God, but I also exist, is that against God's will? That is against God's will. Hashem's ultimate will. But even though Hashem says, I don't want evil, but He has allowed evil to exist in order to overcome it. So from evil's perspective, am I allowed to exist? If you ask evil, are you allowed to exist? From his perspective, yes. Does Hashem want you? Yes. From his perspective, Hashem wants me. So therefore, what should evil do? What should evil be from evil's perspective? Evil. It should do its job of presenting temptation to us, trying to draw us away from Hashem's will, and opposing the divine. That is evil's job. So when evil does that job, it's going against Hashem's will ultimately, but not against the level of will that it relates to. Because the chitzoni saratz, the outer level of will, wants there to be evil in order that it should be overcome. So evil is doing its job.
So evil is on the same level as the non-Jew?
Yeah, although a step worse. Because the non-Jew is chitzoni saratzen, the evil is what Hashem doesn't want. But its source, yeah, it's also in Maamar. Yeah. Yes.
So evil on its own can't access anything higher anyway, because that's not its source.
Correct. Where is evil sourced? In the chitzoni saratzen, in the reluctant will that, well, I don't want evil, I want goodness. But for goodness to be complete, it has to overcome evil, so we've got to have evil. That's where evil comes from. So from its perspective, it is wanted by Hashem. But what level of want? Chitzoni saratzen. Which means you don't really want it. But that's our business, that's not its business. The business of evil is, Hashem put me here to do my job, to be evil, to be a temptation away. So it's doing its job. When evil does evil, when evil tempts us, when evil presents us it tries to cover over godliness in the world, it's doing what it's supposed to do. Is it doing what Hashem wants? Well, it depends what level of want you're talking about. Does Hashem want there to be evil? No. But in Chitzonis Haratzin, He does want there to be evil in order that it should be overcome. So from evil's perspective, it is doing what Hashem wants. I'm doing what Hashem wants me to do. But, Mashe'ein ken, second last line, Yisrael ha'over aver, but when a Jew does evil, does sin, listens to the powers of evil and sins, Liyosha shorshim epnimis haratzin. Hang on a minute, your source, Jew, your source is in pnimis haratzin, the inner level of Hashem's ratzin. Lochen hine af she'oisa hadavar atzmai. Even when the act that you're doing right now, if a non-Jew would do it, it would not be considered a rebellion. But for a Jew to do it, it is a rebellion. Because you are connected to a deeper level of Hashem's will. And so therefore there's a different set of rules for you. And so while what you're doing, a non-Jew can do it, a Jew can't do that. That's considered a rebellion. Because you are going against the level of will that you're connected to. in Yiddish, the level that you're connected with, the level of will you're connected with, that's the level of will that you have to live up to. So therefore, at that moment that you do a sin, you're worse than the powers of evil that drew you to do the sin. And you're completely disconnected from godliness.
But you should know better.
Yeah. So the exact same act, if a non-Jew did it, it wouldn't be against Hashem's will. When a Jew does it, it is. Because you have to connect to the level of will that you're associated with, that you're connected to. And so the powers of evil themselves are doing their job. When you listen to them, you're not doing your job. So you're worse than them. Because they are connected to Hashem. They're fulfilling their mission. They're connected to the level of will to which they associate. Whereas you are not when you listen to them. Now, now being that, we quoted earlier from the Alter Rebbe, the nature of a Jew is that you do not want and cannot be separate from Hashem. You don't want to be and you cannot be separate from Hashem. That's the Jewish nature. In other words, it's unnatural for us to do a sin. It's unnatural for us to disconnect from Hashem. So therefore it's not possible for a Jew to sin. If it weren't for the spirit of folly, the temporary insanity that covers over the truth. We fool ourselves in thinking that we're not separating from Hashem when we sin. We're not really disconnecting from Hashem. It's only because we don't see things for what they are that we're able to sin. If we would have total clarity, it wouldn't be possible for us to sin. Not just we would be strong enough not to sin, it wouldn't be an option. Just like somebody who is thinking clearly will not hurt themselves. Like you don't do something to hurt yourself. If you're of sound mind, if you're thinking clearly, you don't do that. So too, you would not do something to disconnect from your source if you're thinking straight. If you understood who you are and what this act is and what a sin means, you wouldn't be able to do it. You couldn't do it. It just couldn't happen. The only reason why we do sin sometimes is because we have this crazy twisted view of reality that what I'm doing is not really going to disconnect me from Hashem. I'll still be connected to Hashem. The test of this is, the proof of this is, if you would have a scenario where it would be impossible to not see that doing this is disconnecting from God, where it's blatantly obvious that if you go through with this act, you're disconnecting yourself from God. In such a circumstance, in such a circumstance, even the simplest, most ignorant, lowliest Jew will be willing to give their life rather than do such a thing, to go against Hashem's will, if it's where it's obvious. Because he knows that if I do this, I'm disconnecting from God. Right, so this is like what it says in Tanya, that throughout Jewish history, there have been Jews who have been willing to die rather than convert to another religion, or to bow down to an idol, or whatever it is. There's a certain point that they won't go past. And who are these Jews? Not necessarily scholars and learned people, or people who prepared themselves for such a circumstance. Even ignorant, simple, less observant Jews have been willing to die rather than deny their Jewishness. And by the way, the only ones who didn't do that, the only ones who actually did convert or whatever, almost without exception, are Jews who felt that they can still be Jewish and do it. Like, I'll hide my Jewishness and I'll convert. As long as they saw some option of maintaining their Jewishness, their connection to Hashem, then they might do it. But where it's a clear cut, you're denying your Jewishness and that's it, in such a circumstance, a Jew can't do that. It doesn't work. So if we would realize that every time we do a sin, you don't have to bow down to an idol or convert to some other religion. Every time you do a sin, you're disconnecting from Hashem. You're denying godliness. You're disassociating from Hashem. If we'd be aware of that, we could not do that. Just like we can't convert to another religion, we would not be able to do any sin if we would recognize what that sin is. So in Tanya it says this is a very powerful meditation. That if you think that doing this sin is disconnecting me from God, that's what a sin is. If you're aware of that, you won't be able to sin. It won't. The reason why we do sin is because we say, okay, but I'm still Jewish. Like I'm still connected. I've still got other means of connecting. It's that foolishness that allows us to sin. Like the Mittel Rebbe writes, let's say you have a person who has become so evil that they have tried every sin in the book. They've done it all. That person will also be willing to give their life up for Kiddush Hashem, to sanctify God's name. They've done everything in the book, and yet, when it comes to it, they'll be willing to die to be Jewish. And it's happened throughout our history. Because to give up his Jewishness, he knows that means separating from Hashem, and that he can't do. When he was doing the other sins, he was fooling himself that I'm still connected. I'm still Jewish, I've still got a Jewish soul deep down. But to deny my Jewishness, that he can't do. Now, the Rebbe just puts one more point here. This power we have to not allow ourselves to disconnect from Hashem, because it is in our soul from our source, and the source that is in the essence of Hashem, because our soul is sourced in the essence of Hashem, and therefore you can't be separate because it's you and Hashem are one. Now, because the divine source of our soul is the divine light that is beyond everything, higher than any divisions, unlike the Maamar, the light that fills the world that is divided up according to levels. Our soul is sourced in the light that's beyond that has no division. Therefore, it is indivisibly found. This power is indivisibly found in every Jew. The Maamar Almin has different levels. There's higher and lower. So too in spirituality, there are people who are higher spiritually and lower spiritually, if you're talking about Maamar. But on the level of Sovev is everywhere equally, is beyond everything equally. And so therefore that level of the soul is expressed in all Jewish people equally. Whether you're the highest spiritually or the lowest spiritually will make no difference, because it's the HaSovev, the light is beyond. There is no division in that. So therefore even the Jew who's done every sin in the book still has a connection to that level of the soul, and when it comes to it, will not separate themselves from Hashem. There's no division whatsoever. Meaning, the greatest, highest level of soul and the lowest and simplest level of soul will equally have this connection to Hashem in exactly the same way. Which is an amazing thought. That in how many mitzvahs you do, there's division, some higher than lower. But in your connection to Hashem, there's no higher or lower. But one further point. Even if we're talking about a Jew who's on a lowly spiritual state, if the power of Mesiras Nefesh, of self-sacrifice, is aroused in that Jew, it will be aroused in his entire being, on every level of his being. Because it's an indivisible light, it'll be aroused on every level of his personality. Even in the power of speech or action, most external powers, just the way he behaves, even if he doesn't mean it, he won't bow down to the idol. In other words, he won't even pretend he's bowing down to the idol, which is just an external act. Because even his power of speech or his power of action, which is external behavior, not his real self, even that is permeated by this light of the essence of the soul. So not only will he not deny his Jewishness in his heart, but even just in words, he won't want to say, I'm not Jewish. Or just in action to bow down to the idol and not mean it. Even an insincere denial of Jewishness, he won't be able to do it. Because it's coming from the depth of the soul that is beyond division, and so therefore it's indivisibly permeated all levels of his personality. So when the Mesiras Nefesh comes, when you connect to that level, no part of you can be separate from Hashem, even the most external. He'll be willing to give his life, because this sense, this feeling, is beyond division. And therefore every level of his personality is included in that sense of Mesiras Nefesh. And so too, we who are not on a daily basis threatened with our lives, but if we would be connected, if we would realize that any sin disconnects you from Hashem, anything you do against Hashem's will disconnects you from Hashem, so then we wouldn't be able to do it, or even to pretend to do it, or even on any level to even give lip service. We wouldn't be able to deny our Jewishness, and therefore we wouldn't be able to sin. The fact we do sin is because we don't get it clear.